All right, hi Karen.
Hi, Liz.
Thanks for meeting with me today. We're going to take about 30 minutes to work on your plans for your vocabulary instruction for your interactive read aloud. So talk to me really quickly, what book have you chosen for this read aloud?
So I've chosen this one. It's a Hummingbird's Life. It's a nonfiction text about hummingbirds, but it has a lot of non-traditional text features that I thought would be good for students because they're used to seeing, standard informational text. So I thought that this one would help just present a diverse version of the genre. It's got a really high lexile, so there's a lot of vocabulary words in it. So I'm just glad that we have this time to plan because there's so many words that I could choose from, and I'm still figuring out of all of the words in this complex text, which are the most important for me to teach explicitly, because I want kids to comprehend the text, but I know that I don't have time to teach every word.
So you chose this text because it's an informational text, because it's non-traditional, it has some pieces that you feel like are interesting in terms of the way that it's laid out, but also because it has a high lexile level and lots of vocabulary words that you can choose from, but you're not sure which words to choose, right?
No, there's so many.
All right, so when you think about that, it sounds like vocabulary played a big role in your selection of this text. What words do you think you might want to address with students when you're looking in the text?
Yeah, this text is actually part of a text set that I'm using. We're in the middle of a unit on animals that are native to Tennessee, and it's based around our grade level life science standards. So I'm going to be reading some other books about hummingbirds. So I want to make sure that I choose words that are also going to be important in the other books that they read. So I flipped through the text that I'll use in the future, and there definitely were some that keep reappearing. Ruby and throated, because the name of the bird is the ruby-throated hummingbird, and then hum and humming is one that obviously appears a lot. And then some of the words related to how the hummingbird flies, because it's just such a distinguishing feature of the hummingbird, and it's really featured prominently in a lot of the other texts. So words like hover, words like flight, dive. So some of those, maybe my kids already know, but I don't want to assume that. But I think definitely words related to flight. And then some other words, nectar, because all the books talk about the bird's diet. So nectar is the word that we hear a lot. The word migrate is one, because they migrate from Tennessee down south in the winter. But then there's all these others, like on one of the first pages it talks about how the female hummingbird builds its nest, and there's a whole paragraph where I feel like I could teach 5 different words. It talks about stitching the walls together with spider silk, gluing them with saliva, stamping a soft cottony down into the lining. Then she adds lichen and moss to the outside as camouflage. So even in there, I think there's a lot of words that might be unfamiliar to students. So it's choosing ones that are important, but maybe also that I can define quickly. Like spider silk. I'm not sure if that has the same utility as some other words, and it might be harder to find, but I feel like stamping I could probably model quickly. Saliva, that you could just share a common synonym. It's like your spit. Lichen and moss, do you think that those are words that are likely to appear in other settings? Are they worth teaching? Or do I just... Is it okay to just skim over words?
So you mentioned several things. So let's talk about several things that you've mentioned. So you talked about wanting to make sure that you were selecting words that came up in your other texts.
Yes.
Because you're using the text
Yeah,
set.
that feels really important.
And thinking about kind of where you want to go in terms of students' comprehension and what are the pieces that you feel like are really important. You also talked about wanting to make sure that you were building their vocabulary around the things that they didn't know so that they would
Yeah.
understand this text,
Yes.
right? But you've pulled out that there are a lot of words in this text that you can teach. And you've already started to talk about the different ways you could teach them too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about in our training, and I brought it with me so we could remember, that we have the 3 different ways to teach, right?
Yeah.
So we can teach implicitly, explicitly, or we can embed it. And you've already kind of mentioned those 3 different ways and how you might address those. So let's narrow in on the ones for explicit instruction, because I know that you're going to want some key vocabulary words, it sounds like, that are going to translate across all of the texts, and help students in their culminating task. So let's talk about the culminating task a little bit. What is
Yeah.
it that you want students to be able to do at the very end? And then let's back up from there. What vocabulary is going to be important to help them get there?
So the culminating task for this text set is based on the Bird guidebook. So I want to introduce a guide as a form of informational text. Again, I think it's something that's probably new to them as second graders. So their task is actually they're going to make their own guidebook page based on this guidebook from National Geographic for kids. And so there's a section on food, there's a section on range, on habitat, where they live. They'll kind of draw and label a picture, and then there's the place where they'll put some fun facts. So, and then this section on kind of voice and the different noises that they make. So that's actually really a question, because now when I think about the vocabulary they'll need for this task, nectar is a word that I said earlier, which they would definitely need to be able to fill in the food section. Migrate's a word I said earlier, and that's one that they would absolutely need to fill in this part and to fill in the map. And when it talks about kind of the voice and the sounds that they make, humming, because that's the sound that their wings make, is really important. And then I think also a lot of the words related to flight, because I think thinking about the text and the information that they'll get, that's probably where most of the like fun facts will come from, is like they can fly backwards, they can hover in the air. So hover would probably be another good one to bring in.
Okay, so it sounds like we definitely want to teach migrate.
That'd be really important.
We want to teach hover,
Nectar.
and I think there was one more you mentioned. Was there one
Humming.
more? Humming. So when we think about those 4 words, let's kind of think through, first of all, are those ones that we need to teach explicitly? So is it that we need to pull them out of the text, or is the meaning conveyed in the text and we can teach them another way? Or are they so important that they need to be taught kind of standalone?
You know, when I look at how they appear in the text, so here's where nectar comes up, and it says they sip nectar from up to 3,000 flowers each day, and there's an illustration. So some students could infer that nectar is something that you sip or drink, but it doesn't say anywhere explicitly that it's, you know, this sweet juice produced by flowers. So that's probably, given the importance of that vocabulary and detail, worth saying explicitly. The migrate section of this book, it just says this is when the hummers migrate south for winter. So the book actually doesn't provide much even to infer from. So that feels really important. As far as humming, I think this book assumes that kids know what humming is. It doesn't talk about it anywhere. And hover, it's the same thing. It says they rarely perch, instead they hover in midair as they eat. So I think a student could infer some different meanings of hover, but probably not the precision that we need, which is they're floating, they're staying still while in the air, they're not flying around. So those actually feel important to teach explicitly, because I'm not sure they can get the precise meaning just through what the text says, either explicitly or implicitly.
Okay, so it sounds like you've narrowed it down to at least 4 choices.
Yeah.
right? From
Sounds
all
good.
those words that we had before to 4 that you feel like are really important to teach explicitly, because their meaning is not conveyed through the text. And they're important to connect in your text sets and to your
Yeah.
culminating task.
Yeah, because I mean, those are all words that appear in the next text and will be words that they'll need to fill in their guidebook page.
So you talked about a lot of words earlier. So let's
Yes.
go back to some of those other words and make some decisions about those as well. So when you think back to, you had that big section,
Yeah.
right, with silk and saliva and stamping, and then the lichen and the moss, right? Do any of those words feel like they would be important in terms of carryover to your text or to your culminating task?
No. They're very specific to this section. They don't have the same utility that the other words do. I think some of them are, so like stamping, I mean, that's a tier 2 word. So it would be, while it's not critical to understand this text or any of the other texts or to complete any of the tasks, it's a word that they're likely to hear in other settings or encounter in other texts. So I feel like I'd like to do something, even if it's just like a gesture, so that may help them, at least in the moment, to understand it and then maybe recall it later.
So maybe you could embed just maybe stamping your feet when that word comes up.
That would work. Because I think I mean, that conveys the meaning. If I read it, if I stamp while I say it, that would work and that wouldn't interrupt the flow of the read at all. I think saliva's one that it's possible that they would hear in other settings, but it's more that I worry that they actually don't know what saliva is. And because it uses the word gluing them with saliva rather than like licking it, I could see them hearing that phrase and having no clue what is happening.
Okay, so that one might be important to understanding the meaning of this text.
Yeah, and certainly this section. So maybe that's one that's more embedded where I actually do pause and share a short definition or a synonym so that they comprehend this section, but I'm not taking the time the way I am for the words that I'm teaching explicitly.
Okay.
Do you think that would work?
Yeah. So in thinking about that section then, when we think about the silk and the lichen and the moss, maybe those are ones that we don't touch on. But maybe adding a gesture for stamping and then stopping to say, maybe saliva is like your spit.
Yeah, because the other ones there are some pictures, like
Yeah.
the moth. I mean, and spider silks over here is in the sidebar in the caption, so the text might be able to help convey some meaning, whereas like saliva, there's no picture of the bird using its saliva, and there's no picture of the bird stamping. So if I don't provide any additional meaning, the students might not get it. So yeah, that feels like the right approach for that text section.
All right. So when you think now about selecting the words for the rest of your text, what are some things that you want to think about or want to remember as you decide which words you want to teach and which words you want to highlight?
Yeah, so I think that a big idea for me that I hadn't really considered before this conversation was the link to the tasks and what vocabulary students will need for their speaking and writing tasks. So that's definitely something that I'll take with me with this text and with others. And then continuing to think about how the meaning of words, which words need to be understood for the sake of comprehending the text, and which words, like moss, even if students don't understand that particular word, they're still able to comprehend the most important ideas of the text. So thinking about the kind of centrality of meaning to the story, and then also which words are likely to appear in other texts, thinking about the utility of those.
So you want to continue to think about the connections to the text, which you were already doing, but also extend that into the task.
Yeah.
All right, so Karen, when I come in to observe your lesson and look at your explicit vocabulary, what data would you like me to collect so that we know whether or not our planning for vocabulary today was helpful?
I definitely want you to look for the students using the vocabulary words independently. both prompted. So both when I ask them a question related to vocabulary, that they respond with that vocabulary appropriately. But I think also unprompted. So when they're doing their turn-in talks to one another, and then of course when they do their writing task at the end, they've got a graphic organizer that follows the structure of the book with the 4 seasons. So they're recording facts they learn through dictation and drawing and writing, and I'm really hoping that they'll use this specific vocabulary in their writing in that setting too.
All right, so I'll be looking for then the students' use of vocabulary as they're turning and talking independently, as well as when you prompt them with questions and things like that. And then we'll also pull your writing task from the end of that lesson, and we can look at that to see vocabulary usage and see that transfer. All right, so all in all, how has our planning conversation today helped you? What are you thinking about differently just in terms of planning?
Yeah, this was so helpful because, like I said, I came in and I was excited about this text, but I was nervous because it had so many words in it that were likely to be unfamiliar, and I don't want to shy away from using high lexile text with my kids. I know that exposing them to text with quantitative complexity is really important for their development as readers and writers. So I think this helped, one, just like give a sense of relief that I don't have to teach everything. Students can still comprehend the most important ideas of the text, even if they don't comprehend like every little discrete word. So I think it reminded me of the strategies that I can take when planning for vocabulary, thinking about the connection to text and task, and then kind of being reminded of the 3 different types of vocabulary instruction, that just because I don't choose to teach a word explicitly doesn't mean that I don't teach that word. I can use the implicit and embedded strategies to very quickly supply meaning and then move on.
All right. I'm really excited to see you teach this lesson and to see what other words you choose as you continue to plan. Is there anything else I can do to support you right now?
I'll let you know that differentiation is something that's on my mind. So
Okay.
I've planned some pieces in this lesson to differentiate for some of my students who have difficulty expressing ideas in writing. I'm using some sentence starters, and we're doing a lot of oral brainstorming first. So I'd appreciate if you could look for that too, in addition to the vocabulary when you're observing, and then maybe in another coaching conversation we can talk about how that went in ways that I can improve my differentiation as a teacher.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Liz.